30 seconds.
How long is the stage?
7.8 miles. We're looking at a left 4 over crest, open Titan 3, very long. Four, three, two, one, go. Right 4 minus. Oh, this is Titan 3, very long. Right 4 minus into left 4 plus.
Whoops.
It's okay. Right 4, 70 through gate. Right 4 minus over small crest over water, 50. Left 3 over small crest long. Stay right over small crest, right 3 plus. Turn right 2. And so turn right 2 on crest, stay in. Small crest into left 3. Right 3 plus long, 50. Left 5 long. Into right 6 over small crest. Left 5, 300. Go, go, go. Crest into right 5, 70. Left 5 over crest soft. Right 5 plus. Turn right 2 minus soft starts.
I'm gonna go right inside here. I think.
Try to.
I'll try to. Ah.
Left 5, 50. Right 6 into left 6 plus, 50. Right 5 minus over small crest. Into left 5 open over small crest, Titan 6. Repeat. 5 open over small crest, Titan 6. 100.
Next.
Left 4 plus over small crest. Left 6 over crest, no cut. 70. Right 4 minus Titan long. Left 5. Right 4 plus long. Into crest 100. Right 5 minus over small crest. Into left 5 minus, very long. Caution Titans 3 plus, slippy, very long. I see caution Titans slippy, 3 plus. 50, left 5 plus. Right 5 minus, very soft. Into crest 150.
What's this?
Right 4 plus long over crest 70. Left 5 minus long 150, soft ends. Right 6 plus. Left 5 plus. And at the end there is a right 4 over small crest long, open long. Into small crest, kinks 450. Repeat, small crest, kinks 450. Caution crest, brake after crest, 50. Soft starts, turn left 2 plus. Brake after
I
crest.
can't, Kieran. It's soft.
Yeah, you can.
Where is he?
Left 4, very long, 150.
I thought you said soft-ended.
That's what it said. Stay left over crest 70, left 6, 100. Stay right over crest, 200, soft ends, supposedly. Right 5 plus. Into left 6 plus, long over small crest, 120. Go, go, go. Left 6 plus, long over small crest, 120. Left 5, 70. Small crest 70, left 6, tightens 5 minus over small crest 50. Right 5 plus on crest 120.
Next.
Right 4 long, soft, into crest. Left 5, into right 5 plus. Into left 5 minus over small crest long, tighten. Into right 6, 50. Left 5 minus long, soft, 70. Crest 100. Left 6 plus over small crest. Caution brake. Turn right 3 plus soft. Left 6 plus, 50. Caution left 3, late, very slippy, down. Open tighten 5. 50. Right 4 over water. Right 6 over small crest, open, long. Into small crest, left 4 plus.
Next.
Left 6, 70. Right 5 minus, no cut, soft, 50. Left 5, soft over crest, open, long over small crest, 50. Right 6 over small crest, soft, 120. Turn right 3, soft, deceptive, opens, right here. Right 3. Into right 3 minus, soft. 250. Right 5 over crest into soft, 250. Stay left over small crest, 50. Crest, 250. Left 5 plus, very soft. Into crest, 150. Small crest, 70. Left 5 plus, very long, 100. Crest, 250. Finish, 50. Crest, 70. Turn left 4. Done.
Ooh, good job.
You too.